Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise. He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
They said it was just another letter. But when Prince William finally read what his mother wrote in those final months, he broke down completely. Diana knew something terrifying was coming, and she made sure William would discover the truth after she was gone. Palace insiders tried to bury this letter for decades. Now it's finally been exposed, and what Diana revealed about William's future is absolutely chilling. It was a desperate warning that nobody wanted him to see. What was Diana so afraid of? The letters were being sold by the estate of Violet Collison, a woman who had worked with the Spencer family for decades.
A movement that demands courage, cooperation and unwavering commitment to our planet's future. A future that belongs not to us, but to our children and grandchildren.
Violet wasn't simply hired to help, she had been there through it all, watching Diana grow from a shy young girl into one of the most photographed women in history. Over the years, Diana had written to Violet regularly, sharing updates about her life, her struggles, and most importantly, her children. What made these letters so special was their honesty. Unlike the carefully worded statements that came from Buckingham Palace, these were Diana's real words, written in her own hand. There was no public relations team polishing them, no protocol officer reviewing the content. They were simply one person writing to another, sharing the kind of everyday thoughts that anyone might put in a letter to a trusted friend. One letter in particular caught the attention of historians and royal watchers. It was dated July 8th, 1981, written just weeks before Diana married Prince Charles. At the time, she was only 20 years old, about to participate in what would become one of the most watched weddings in television history. The pressure must have been enormous. Hundreds of millions of people around the world were preparing to watch her walk down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral. Every detail of the ceremony was being scrutinized, from the design of her dress to the guest list to the music selections. Yet, in her letter to Violet, Diana wrote with surprising lightness. She mentioned that everyone around her was racing to handle last-minute preparations, but she noted that the bride herself was keeping calm. It was a small glimpse into her character, showing a young woman who could maintain her composure even when the entire world was watching. That ability to stay grounded, even in extraordinary circumstances, would become one of her defining characteristics. As the years went by, Diana's letters naturally evolved. The excited tone of a young bride gave way to something deeper and more complex. She wrote about the challenges of royal life, the constant media attention, and the difficulties of raising children in such an unusual environment. But through it all, one theme remained absolutely constant: her devotion to William and Harry. The letters revealed a mother who thought constantly about her sons. She worried about their happiness, their education, and their emotional well-being. She wanted them to grow up with kindness and compassion, qualities that weren't always easy to maintain within the rigid structure of royal life. Diana understood that her children would one day have enormous responsibilities, but she was determined that they would also have something just as important: genuine empathy for others. One letter from June 21st, 1989, perfectly captured this side of Diana. Written on official Kensington Palace stationery, it was addressed to Sergeant George Plum of the Special Escort Group. Diana was writing to thank him for organizing a motorcycle display at the palace for William's 7th birthday. Her gratitude came through clearly in every line. She told the sergeant that the show had brought tremendous joy not just to William, but to all the children who attended, along with their mothers. What made this particular letter even more touching was that Diana hadn't signed it alone. Next to her signature were two other names, written in the slightly messy handwriting of young children: William and Harry. It was such a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the kind of mother Diana was. She wanted her sons to learn gratitude from an early age, to understand that when someone did something kind for them, the proper response was to say thank you. By having them add their names to the letter, she was teaching them this lesson in the most natural way possible. For people who had followed Diana's story over the years, these letters represented something more than just historical curiosities. They reignited conversations about her approach to motherhood and the way she had challenged royal traditions. The British monarchy had, for generations, operated according to strict rules about how royal children should be raised. There was an expectation of formality, of distance, of children being primarily cared for by nannies and staff rather than by their parents directly. Diana had watched this system in action and decided it wasn't for her. She wanted to be present in her children's lives in a way that previous royal mothers simply hadn't been. She wanted to tuck them in at night, to read them stories, to be the one they came to when they were scared or sad or excited about something. This wasn't about rejecting the royal family or dismissing tradition entirely. It was about being the kind of mother she felt her children needed. According to Ken Worf, who served as Diana's royal protection officer for several years, she was incredibly thoughtful about giving William and Harry experiences beyond palace walls. She would take them to places that most royal children had never been: amusement parks, fast food restaurants, even riding on public transportation. These weren't publicity stunts designed to make her look relatable. Diana genuinely believed that her sons needed to understand how ordinary people lived. The letters that surfaced in 2004 arrived at a significant moment. 7 years had passed since Diana's death in Paris, but the world was still processing the loss. William was now a young man attending university, no longer the teenager who had walked behind his mother's coffin with the eyes of the world upon him. People were beginning to see how Diana's influence had shaped him, how the values she had worked so hard to instill were evident in the way he carried himself and the causes he chose to support. These handwritten letters became more than just pieces of paper with words on them. They were physical evidence of a mother's love, tangible proof of the relationship Diana had built with her sons. Every letter she wrote to friends and staff members seemed to circle back to William and Harry. She would mention their achievements, their personalities, their growth. Even when she was writing about something else entirely, they were never far from her thoughts. The auction house had expected interest in the letters, but what they got was something more profound. People weren't just curious about royal gossip or interested in owning a piece of history. They were moved by the humanity in Diana's words, by the reminder that beneath all the titles and the fame and the tragedy, there had been a woman who loved her children with fierce devotion. What these letters ultimately revealed was a side of Diana that the public had always sensed but rarely saw, confirmed in such personal terms. She wasn't just the princess who shook hands with AIDS patients, or walked through minefields, or challenged the royal establishment. She was also a mother who worried about birthday parties, who wanted her children to learn good manners, who hoped they would grow up to be kind. Princess Diana understood something that many in the royal family seemed to have forgotten. Privilege without perspective can create people who are disconnected from reality. She had married into one of the world's most famous families, but she never wanted her sons to grow up isolated behind palace walls, unaware of how most people actually lived. From the very beginning, she made it her mission to show William and Harry that the world was much bigger than royal estates and official ceremonies. Her approach was deliberate and often required careful planning. Taking two young princes out into public spaces wasn't as simple as bundling them into a car and heading to the nearest playground. There were security considerations, media concerns, and the ever-present risk of causing a public spectacle. But Diana was determined, and she worked closely with her protection officers to make these outings happen. Ken Worf, who protected Diana during some of her most active years as a mother, later described how meticulously she would organize these trips. She would choose times when places were likely to be quieter, minimizing both the security risk and the disruption to other people. Sometimes she would wear simple clothes and minimal jewelry, doing her best to blend in. It wasn't about hiding who she was, but rather about giving her sons the chance to experience things without constantly being reminded that they were different from everyone else. The trips to McDonald's became particularly famous, though not because Diana was trying to make a statement about fast food. She took William and Harry there because it was a place where normal children went, where they could sit in plastic booths and eat burgers and chips just like any other family. For the princes, these visits were unremarkable in the best possible way. They weren't being served by palace staff on fine china. They were standing in line, choosing from a menu, and eating food that came in paper wrapping. Diana also took them on the London Underground, an experience that would have been unthinkable for previous generations of royal children. She wanted them to understand how most people in the city got around, to see commuters heading to work, to experience the particular atmosphere of the tube during rush hour. These journeys required even more security coordination than the restaurant visits, but Diana felt they were worth the effort. Theme parks were another favorite destination. Thorpe Park and Alton Towers saw visits from Diana and her sons, and while security personnel were always present, Diana worked hard to let the boys enjoy themselves as naturally as possible. She would wait in lines with them, go on rides, let them eat ice cream and cotton candy. For a few hours, they could just be children having fun, not princes fulfilling duties. But Diana's vision for her sons went beyond simply giving them enjoyable experiences. She wanted them to develop genuine empathy, to understand that not everyone had been born into comfort and security. This meant exposing them to realities that were far less pleasant than theme parks and fast food restaurants. One of the most significant moments in William's childhood came when Diana took him to visit Centrepoint, a charity dedicated to helping homeless young people in London. This wasn't a brief photo opportunity or a ceremonial ribbon cutting. Diana brought William there so he could meet teenagers who had grown up without families, without stable homes, without the advantages that he took for granted. During that visit, William spoke with young people who had slept rough on the streets, who had struggled with addiction, who had aged out of the care system with nowhere to go. Some were only a few years older than he was. The experience made a lasting impression on him, and in the years since, he has returned to issues of homelessness repeatedly in his charitable work. That connection can be traced directly back to what his mother showed him as a child. Diana applied this same principle across multiple areas. She wanted William and Harry to understand that illness and disability were part of human experience, so she took them to hospitals where they could meet patients facing serious health challenges. She wanted them to understand loneliness and isolation, so she introduced them to elderly people in care homes. She wanted them to understand that HIV and AIDS patients deserved compassion rather than fear, so she brought them to clinics where people were receiving treatment. None of this was about making her sons feel guilty for their privileged position. Diana wasn't trying to burden them with inappropriate responsibility at a young age. What she was doing was more subtle and more important. She was teaching them to see other people as fully human, to recognize that circumstances of birth created vastly different life experiences, and that those with advantages had a responsibility to help those without them. At the same time, Diana was fiercely protective of her children when it came to media intrusion. She understood the public's interest in the royal family, and she recognized that William and Harry would never have completely private lives. But she also knew firsthand how damaging constant media scrutiny could be. She had experienced it herself from the moment her relationship with Charles became public, and the pressure had taken a serious toll on her mental health. Her solution was to negotiate what amounted to an informal agreement with the press. She worked with palace officials to arrange official photo opportunities at key moments in her children's lives. The first day of school, family holidays, significant birthdays, these occasions would be documented, and the media would get their pictures. In exchange, Diana asked for periods of privacy where her sons could go about their daily lives, without photographers following them. It was a delicate balance, and it didn't always work perfectly. Some members of the media respected the boundaries, while others pushed against them constantly. But Diana never stopped trying to protect her sons from the most intrusive aspects of public life. She understood that they needed space to make mistakes, to have awkward phases, to be embarrassed and silly, and all the other things that children need to be, without having those moments captured and published for the world to see. Andrew Morton, who worked closely with Diana on her biography, documented how deeply she worried about the media's impact on her children. She had lived under intense scrutiny throughout her marriage, dealing with speculation about her weight, her mental health, her relationship with Charles, and every other aspect of her life. The coverage had often been cruel and invasive, and she desperately wanted to spare William and Harry from the worst of it. Her letters from this period reflected these concerns constantly. When she wrote to friends and staff members, she would mention her worry about photographers outside the boys' schools, or her frustration with newspapers publishing unauthorized pictures from private moments. She felt the weight of trying to give her sons a childhood that felt normal, while knowing that nothing about their situation was actually normal at all. Despite these challenges, Diana succeeded in creating something remarkable. She gave William and Harry a foundation that was fundamentally different from what previous royal children had received. They understood from an early age that their privilege came with responsibility, that the title of prince meant something beyond ceremony and tradition. They learned that being royal wasn't about being superior to others, but rather about having a platform that could be used to help people who had less. The impact of Diana's parenting choices became evident as her sons grew older. Both William and Harry have spoken publicly about their mother's influence, crediting her with teaching them empathy and showing them the importance of connecting with people from all backgrounds. The charitable work they have both pursued as adults reflects the lessons Diana instilled in them during those carefully planned outings and hospital visits. By the time the letters from Diana surfaced at auction in 2004, William was 22 years old and Harry was nearly 20. They were no longer the young boys their mother had taken to McDonald's or Centrepoint, but the foundation she had built was still there, still shaping how they understood their role in the world and their responsibility to use their position for something meaningful beyond maintaining tradition. By the early 1992s, the fairy tale marriage that the world had celebrated a decade earlier was clearly falling apart. Diana and Charles had tried to maintain appearances, but the cracks in their relationship had become impossible to hide. Behind the scenes, both had grown deeply unhappy, and the strain was affecting every aspect of their lives. For Diana, however, there was one constant that kept her grounded through all the turmoil: her sons. When the official separation was announced in December 1992, it sent shockwaves through Britain and beyond. The idea that the heir to the throne and his wife were splitting up was almost unthinkable in the context of modern royal history. Prime Minister John Major announced the separation in Parliament, and suddenly the private troubles of a marriage became a matter of national discussion. Diana was 31 years old, William was 10, and Harry had just turned 8. The separation changed the dynamics of life at Kensington Palace dramatically. Diana no longer had to coordinate with Charles about daily decisions, but she also no longer had his presence as a co-parent, however limited that had been. She threw herself even more completely into motherhood, structuring her entire life around William and Harry's needs. Their school schedules became her schedules. Their activities became her priorities. Diana chose schools for her sons that emphasized emotional well-being alongside academic achievement. Wetherby School and Ludgrove weren't just selected because they were appropriate for royal children. Diana had researched them carefully, speaking with staff about their approach to pastoral care and their understanding of the unique pressures her sons faced. She wanted environments where William and Harry could feel supported, where teachers understood that despite their titles, they were still children who needed guidance and patience. She didn't simply drop them at school and assume everything would be fine. Diana attended parent-teacher meetings regularly, often surprising staff with her genuine interest in the details of her son's education. She would ask specific questions about their progress, their friendships, their struggles. When the boys participated in sports days or school plays, she was there, cheering them on like any other parent. These weren't token appearances for the cameras. This was Diana being fully present in her children's lives. The handwritten thank you notes she sent to school staff over the years revealed just how engaged she was. Teachers and administrators would receive letters expressing gratitude for their care of William and Harry, acknowledging specific incidents or achievements. These notes weren't written by a secretary or assistant. They were Diana's own words, in her own handwriting, showing that she noticed and appreciated the people who helped look after her sons. The challenge of co-parenting under such intense public scrutiny was immense. Every decision about the boys became potential fodder for media speculation. Where would they spend Christmas? Who would attend which school event? How would holidays be divided? Diana and Charles had to navigate these questions, while photographers followed their every move and newspapers analyzed their choices. Despite the separation, Diana remained committed to making sure William and Harry maintained a relationship with their father. She understood that however her marriage had ended, Charles was still their parent, and the boys needed that connection. But she also made sure that when they were with her, they knew they were her absolute priority. As the situation deteriorated further, Diana found herself increasingly willing to speak publicly about what had happened to her marriage. The breaking point came in June 1994, when Charles participated in a documentary with journalist Jonathan Dimbleby. During the interview, Charles admitted to being unfaithful to Diana, though he claimed it had only happened after the marriage had irretrievably broken down. The admission caused a sensation, and Diana found herself having to explain to her sons what was being said about their father in the newspapers and on television. Diana felt she needed to tell her own story, to explain her side of what had happened. After careful consideration, she agreed to participate in a BBC Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. The interview was recorded in secret at Kensington Palace in November 1995, and when it aired on the evening of November 20th, more than 22 million people in Britain tuned in to watch. For 38 minutes, Diana spoke with remarkable candor about her marriage, her struggles with bulimia, her feelings of isolation within the royal family, and Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. She discussed her own admitted affair with James Hewitt, but perhaps most significantly, she spoke about her hopes for her sons. She talked about wanting William and Harry to grow up with emotional intelligence, about hoping they would understand the feelings and experiences of ordinary people. She expressed her belief that William could be a modern king, one who led with compassion and empathy. The interview was explosive. Diana's directness and vulnerability connected with viewers, but it also created enormous problems within the royal family. She had broken one of the fundamental rules of royal life by speaking so openly about private matters. The palace was furious, and the consequences came swiftly. Just weeks after the interview aired, Queen Elizabeth took action. After consulting with the Archbishop of Canterbury and Prime Minister John Major, she sent letters to both Diana and Charles stating that a divorce should proceed without delay. According to royal biographers and people close to Diana at the time, she was devastated by this response. Her former butler, Paul Burrell, later said that Diana had hoped for understanding and support, not a forced ending to her marriage. The divorce negotiations stretched across months. There were discussions about finances, about which properties Diana would keep, about her future role and title, and, crucially, about custody arrangements for William and Harry. Diana fought hard to maintain her influence over her son's upbringing, and ultimately the arrangements allowed her significant time with them. On August 28, 1996, the divorce was finalized. Diana kept the title Princess of Wales but lost the styling Her Royal Highness. This might seem like a minor technicality to outsiders, but within the rigid hierarchy of the royal family, it carried real meaning. It meant that technically, Diana would now have to curtsy to members of the family who held the HRH title, including her own sons once they reached adulthood. For Diana, this felt like a final rejection, a way of making clear that she was no longer truly part of the family. Paul Burrell recounted that Diana was particularly upset about the idea of having to curtsy to William and Harry. In a moment that has become part of Diana lore, she reportedly confided this worry to William. The 14-year-old prince, seeing his mother's distress, told her not to worry, saying that when he became king, he would give the title back to her. The story has never been officially confirmed by William or other members of the royal family, but it captured something real about the relationship between Diana and her eldest son. There was a tenderness there, a mutual protectiveness. William understood that his mother was hurting, and even as a teenager, he wanted to reassure her that her value wasn't defined by royal titles or protocol. After the divorce, Diana stepped away from most of her royal duties. She had held patronages with more than 100 charities and organizations, but she couldn't maintain all of them without the official support of the palace. She chose to focus on just 6 causes that mattered most to her: Centrepoint, Great Ormond Street Hospital, the Royal Marsden Hospital, the National AIDS Trust, the Leprosy Mission, and the English National Ballet. This narrower focus allowed Diana to engage more deeply with the work. She wasn't just lending her name to these organizations. She was visiting patients, meeting with staff, learning about challenges and successes. Her commitment to these causes only intensified after leaving official royal duties behind. If anything, she felt freer to do the work in her own way, without having to worry about whether it fit with palace expectations. But through everything, her focus remained on William and Harry. She structured her life around their school terms, made sure she was available when they needed her, and continued to be an active presence in their daily lives. Friends and staff described Diana during this period as someone who had found a kind of clarity. The divorce had been painful, but it had also freed her to be fully herself, to make choices based on what she believed was right, rather than what protocol demanded. Life after divorce gave Diana a strange kind of freedom. She was no longer bound by the same rigid expectations that came with being a working member of the royal family, but that freedom came at a cost. Without the official protection and support system of the palace, she often felt exposed and vulnerable. The media attention hadn't diminished at all. If anything, photographers seemed even more relentless now that she was operating independently. Diana focused her energy on the handful of charities she had chosen to continue supporting. These weren't casual commitments. She visited hospitals regularly, spending time with patients who were facing terminal illnesses or difficult treatments. At Great Ormond Street Hospital, she would sit with sick children, talking to them about their favorite television shows or toys, making them feel like they mattered beyond being just another patient. At the Royal Marsden Hospital, she met with cancer patients, holding their hands and listening to their fears about treatment and prognosis. Her work with the National AIDS Trust was particularly meaningful to her. During a time when fear and misinformation about HIV and AIDS were still widespread, Diana had made headlines years earlier by shaking hands with AIDS patients without wearing gloves. It seemed like a small gesture, but it sent a powerful message that people living with HIV deserved compassion rather than isolation. She continued this work after her divorce, visiting clinics and meeting with patients, always treating them with dignity and warmth. But even as Diana threw herself into humanitarian work, there was an undercurrent of anxiety that never quite went away. Without royal protection, officers assigned to her full-time, she felt watched in a different way. Photographers would camp outside her home, follow her car through London, and show up at private gyms and restaurants. She began to worry about her safety in more serious ways. In October 1995, while she was still married but in the midst of difficult negotiations, Diana wrote a letter that would later become one of the most controversial documents associated with her life. In it, she expressed fears that her husband was planning an accident involving her car, specifically mentioning brake failure and serious head injury. She gave the letter to her butler, Paul Burrell, with instructions to keep it safe. The letter's authenticity has been verified by handwriting experts, but its meaning remains debated. Some people believe it showed genuine fear based on real threats. Others think it reflected Diana's state of mind during an incredibly stressful period, when paranoia and anxiety might have led her to imagine dangers that weren't actually there. What's clear is that Diana felt vulnerable, and whether or not the specific threat was real, the fear she experienced certainly was. Despite these anxieties, Diana didn't retreat from public life. Instead, she seemed determined to use whatever time she had to make a difference. In January 1997, she traveled to Angola with the International Red Cross to draw attention to the devastating impact of landmines. Angola had been torn apart by decades of civil war, and millions of landmines remained buried in fields and villages long after the fighting had ended. These weapons continued to kill and maim civilians, many of them children, who had no connection to the original conflict. Diana walked through a recently cleared minefield wearing protective gear, surrounded by signs warning of danger. The photographs from that trip became some of the most iconic images of her later life. They showed a woman who was willing to put herself in uncomfortable and even dangerous situations to bring attention to causes she believed in. The trip helped galvanize international support for the Mine Ban Treaty, which was signed later that year. Throughout all of this, Diana never lost sight of what mattered most to her: preparing William and Harry for the lives they would lead. She knew that William, as the future king, would face particular pressures and expectations. She wanted him to understand that leadership wasn't about authority or privilege, it was about service and compassion. According to people close to Diana, she would often talk to William about her humanitarian work, explaining why certain causes mattered and what she hoped to accomplish. She would tell him that his position gave him a platform that most people didn't have, and that platform could be used to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. She wanted him to see his future role not as a burden, but as an opportunity to do meaningful good in the world. Diana was teaching both her sons about empathy in practical ways. It wasn't enough to feel sorry for people who were suffering. She wanted William and Harry to understand that they had the ability and the responsibility to take action. She would say things like, "Use your position to help those who have no voice," reminding them that their privilege came with obligations. In the summer of 1997, Diana seemed to be finding a new equilibrium. She was dating Dodi Fayed, enjoying time on his family's yacht in the Mediterranean. She was making plans for the coming months, including more charitable work and time with her sons. William was about to turn 15 and start a new academic year at Eton College. Harry was 13 and still at Ludgrove. Diana was looking forward to spending time with them, continuing to guide them as they grew into young men. Then, in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, everything changed. Diana and Dodi were being driven through Paris when their car crashed in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Dodi and the driver, Henri Paul, were killed instantly. Diana was pulled from the wreckage alive but died a few hours later at a Paris hospital. She was 36 years old. The news reached Britain in the middle of the night, and by morning, the entire world knew. The reaction was extraordinary. People who had never met Diana felt genuine grief at her loss. Flowers began piling up outside Kensington Palace, eventually creating a carpet of bouquets that stretched for hundreds of meters. Strangers stood in the streets crying. The outpouring of emotion was unprecedented. For William and Harry, the loss was incomprehensible. They were at Balmoral Castle in Scotland with their father and grandparents when they learned their mother had died. They were just 15 and 12 years old, suddenly facing a grief that would mark the rest of their lives. The decision was made that they would walk behind their mother's coffin during the funeral procession through London, a choice that remains controversial because of how young they were and how public the moment was. The image of those two boys walking behind the horse-drawn carriage carrying their mother's coffin, their faces showing the strain of trying to maintain composure while millions watched, became one of the defining images of Diana's funeral. The whole world could see their grief, and there was something almost unbearable about witnessing such private pain in such a public setting. Even after her death, Diana's influence on her sons remained powerful and evident. The letters that surfaced years later at auction showed just how much thought she had put into their upbringing, how carefully she had tried to instill certain values and perspectives, her determination to make them see beyond royal privilege, to understand the experiences of ordinary people, to lead with compassion rather than authority. All of that work continued to shape who William and Harry became. In the years since Diana's death, both princes have spoken about their mother's impact on their lives. They've described how she taught them to care about people who were struggling, how she showed them that royal status didn't make them better than anyone else, just more fortunate. They've talked about how she made them laugh, how she would sneak them sweets when they were supposed to be eating healthily, how she would dance around the kitchen at Kensington Palace to embarrass them. William has continued his mother's work on homelessness, supporting organizations like Centrepoint that Diana first introduced him to as a child. Harry has taken up causes related to mental health and supporting veterans, always emphasizing the importance of compassion and breaking down stigma. Both approaches reflect what Diana tried to teach them, that being royal meant having a responsibility to help others. The lost letter that emerged in 2004, along with all the other personal correspondence that has surfaced over the years, serves as a reminder of who Diana was beyond the public image. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales or the People's Princess, or any of the other titles that were given to her. She was a mother who loved her children fiercely, who worried about their futures, who wanted them to be kind and compassionate human beings above all else. In the end, that might be her most enduring legacy. Two sons who carry forward the values she worked so hard to instill in them, ensuring that her influence continues long after her life was cut tragically short.